My son stole my savings without asking, but I let life teach him the price of greed. I remember the exact moment I discovered what my boy had done. The kitchen was quiet that morning, just the hum of the old refrigerator and the creak of floorboards beneath my worn slippers. I reached behind the flour sack in the cupboard, my hand knowing the way by muscle memory alone, and my fingers found nothing but dust and emptiness. 23 years of sacrifice. Gone. Just like that. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the empty space where my future used to live, and I felt something inside me shift, like a door closing softly in a house I'd always thought was mine. They say a mother's love is unconditional, and maybe that's true. But what they don't tell you is that unconditional love doesn't mean you don't bleed when your child cuts you. It just means you bleed quietly. Welcome, my dear. This is Grandma Alice Stories, where every tale carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. Pour yourself something warm, settle into your favorite chair, and come close, because today's story isn't easy to tell, but it's one that needs telling. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who teach us life's hardest lessons. And sometimes we have to step back and let the world do the teaching we couldn't. My son, Marcus, was born on a Tuesday in late September, during a thunderstorm so fierce the lights in the hospital flickered like dying fireflies. The nurses said it was a sign that he'd be a force of nature, strong and unstoppable. I held him against my chest that night, his tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, and I made him a promise. Asterisk, you'll never know the hunger I knew. You'll never wear shoes with holes in them like I did. I'll make sure of it. Asterisk, and I kept that promise. Lord knows I kept it. His father left when Marcus was 3. Packed a duffel bag one Sunday afternoon while we were at church and never looked back. Didn't leave a note, didn't leave money, just left a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the kitchen counter like it was an explanation. So it was just the two of us after that. Me and my boy. I worked double shifts at Rosie's Diner, serving coffee and smiles to truckers and travelers who never knew my feet were screaming inside those white sneakers. I cleaned houses on weekends, scrubbed toilets for families who had more bathrooms than I had rooms. Every penny I didn't spend on rent, food, or Marcus's school supplies went into that coffee tin. That tin became sacred to me. It wasn't just money, it was hope. It was the promise that one day, maybe, I could stop working myself to the bone. Maybe I could afford the surgery my knees had been begging for. Maybe I could finally fix the leaky roof before the next winter came. Maybe, just maybe, I could breathe. Marcus grew up watching me count those bills by candlelight when the electricity got shut off. He saw me water down the soup to make it stretch another day. He heard me pray over unpaid bills at the kitchen table, my voice cracking with exhaustion I tried to hide. And every time, he'd wrap his arms around me and whisper, "Mama, when I grow up, you're never gonna struggle again. I promise." Those words were my lullaby, my reason to wake up at 4 in the morning when my body wanted to quit, my reason to smile through the pain. He was a good boy, my Marcus, smart as a whip, charming as sunrise. He made decent grades, stayed out of serious trouble, and had dreams bigger than our little apartment could hold. By the time he turned 25, he had a steady job at the warehouse, his own place across town, and a girlfriend named Simone who wore perfume that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I was proud of him, proud that he'd made something of himself despite everything. But pride, I've learned, can make you blind to what's right in front of you. It started small, the changes in Marcus. He'd visit less often, and when he did, his eyes were always somewhere else, distracted by phone calls and text messages that made him smile in ways I didn't recognize. He talked about opportunities and investments with a fever in his voice that reminded me too much of his father before the bottle took him. Simone would sit on my worn couch, her manicured nails tapping against her phone screen, her lips pressed together in a tight line whenever Marcus mentioned needing money for the next big thing. "Mama," he'd say, leaning forward with that boyish grin that used to melt my worry away, "I'm telling you, This is it. This is how we change everything. You won't have to work another day in your life. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But there was something in his eyes, something hungry and desperate, that made my stomach turn. It was the same look I'd seen in men at the diner who bet their last dollars on lottery tickets, convinced that luck was just one scratch away. Baby? I'd say softly, pouring him tea in the chipped mug he'd used since childhood. Slow money is sure money. You don't have to rush into anything. But he'd just laugh, kiss my forehead, and tell me I worried too much. I got this, Mama. Trust me. And I did trust him. That was my mistake. It was a Thursday morning in March when I reached for my coffee tin. I needed to pay the electric bill before they shut it off again, and I was $70 short from my last paycheck. My hand slipped into the cupboard, moved the flour sack aside, and touched nothing but empty air. For a moment, I thought I'd put it somewhere else. Maybe I'd moved it during spring cleaning and forgotten. I checked the bedroom, under the mattress, inside the closet, behind the bathroom mirror. I tore through that small apartment like a woman possessed, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. But I knew. Deep down, I already knew. The tin was gone. And so was every dollar I'd saved for 23 years. $7,418. I knew the exact amount because I'd counted it just 2 weeks earlier, adding the $40 in tips I'd made from the Sunday breakfast rush. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there next to the open cupboard, and I stared at the space where my future used to be. The refrigerator hummed its mechanical song. Somewhere outside, children laughed on their way to school. The world kept turning like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. My phone rang 3 times before I found the strength to answer it. Hey, Mama. Marcus's voice was bright, too bright, like sunshine that burns instead of warms. Just calling to check on you. How you doing? I closed my eyes and saw him as a baby again, so small and helpless in my arms. I saw him at 6 years old, crying because the other kids made fun of his secondhand shoes. I saw him at 16, graduating high school with honors, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering thank you into my hair. Marcus? I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside my chest. Where's my tin? The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard him breathe. A quick, shallow sound like a man caught in a lie. Mama, I can explain. Where is it, baby? I needed it. There's this investment opportunity, and I just need a few months to turn it around, and then I'll pay you back double, I swear. You took it without asking. I knew you'd say no. His voice cracked with frustration, with something that sounded almost like anger. You never believe in me, Mama. You always think the worst. This is my chance to make something real, to finally take care of you the way you took care of me. But you'd rather I stay small and safe and broke like. He stopped himself, but the words hung there anyway. Like you. I should have been angry. I should have screamed, cursed, called him every name my hurt could conjure. But all I felt was tired. So bone-deep tired that anger seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. Come see me tomorrow, I said softly. We need to talk face to face. Mama. Tomorrow, Marcus. I hung up before he could make more promises he wouldn't keep. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the empty space on the counter where the tin used to sit. 23 years of sacrifice, stolen by the one person I'd sacrificed it all for. The irony was so sharp it could cut. But here's what I knew, what years of hard living had taught me. You can't force a man to see his mistakes. You can't drag wisdom into a heart that's locked against it. Some lessons have to be lived, not taught. Some prices have to be paid in full before the value is understood. So I made a decision that night, sitting alone in my small kitchen with nothing but moonlight and memory for company. I wouldn't beg for my money back. I wouldn't guilt him or threaten him or try to make him see what he'd done. I would let life teach him what I couldn't. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm settling over me like morning fog. Marcus would come today, full of excuses and empty promises. And I would look him in the eyes, those eyes I'd loved from the moment they opened, and I would let him go. Let him walk into whatever storm was waiting for him with my money in his pocket and his arrogance as his compass. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to step aside and let the world finish the lesson you started. What I didn't know then was just how cruel a teacher life could be, and how soon my son would come crawling back, broken and begging for the mercy he never thought to show me. Marcus arrived at noon the next day, and I knew the moment I opened the door that he'd already built his defense. He stood there on my doorstep wearing new shoes, leather ones, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent, and carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers still wrapped in plastic. His smile was rehearsed, careful, like he'd practiced it in the mirror on the drive over. But his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. "Hey, Mama," he said, leaning in for a hug that I let happen but didn't return. "I brought you flowers, the yellow ones you like." I stepped aside to let him in, saying nothing. Sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 accusations. He walked past me into the small living room, and I watched him take in the space. The same worn furniture he'd grown up with, the same faded curtains I'd hung 15 years ago, the same leaning bookshelf held together with faith and wood glue. I wondered if he saw it differently now that he'd stolen my chance to ever change it. I gestured toward the couch, and he sat, those expensive shoes gleaming against my threadbare carpet like accusations of their own. I took my chair across from him, the one with the cushion that had molded to my body after decades of use, and I waited. I'd learned long ago that guilty people need to fill silence. It makes them uncomfortable, makes them talk just to stop the weight of it from crushing them. Marcus cleared his throat. "Mama, I know you're upset." Upset. I repeated the word like I was tasting it, testing its weight. "That's an interesting choice of word, baby." He shifted, those new shoes scuffing against the floor. "Okay, you're angry. You have every right to be. But if you just let me explain how you came into my home, went through my things, and took 23 years of my life without even the respect of asking." My voice was calm, so calm it seemed to unsettle him more than yelling would have. "Please, I'm listening." He ran his hand over his face, a gesture so much like his father it made my chest ache. "I didn't want to take it, Mama. I swear I didn't. But this opportunity, it's real. Tommy, you remember Tommy from the warehouse? His cousin knows this guy who's flipping houses and they're looking for investors. Small investment now, triple return in 6 months. 6 months, Mama, and I can pay you back everything plus interest." Tommy's cousin's friend. I let the words hang there. You gave away my entire life savings to Tommy's cousin's friend. It's not like that. It's a legitimate business. They've already flipped 2 houses in Riverside, made $40,000 profit on each one. This is real money, Mama. Real opportunity. The kind that doesn't come around twice. I looked at my son, this man who'd once been my entire world, and I saw the fever in his eyes, the desperation, the absolute certainty that he was right and everyone else was wrong. I'd seen that look before in other men who'd bet everything on dreams that crumbled like sand castles at high tide. "And Simone?" I asked quietly. "What does she think about this investment?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or shame. "Simone doesn't understand business. She's always been risk-averse, always playing it safe. That's why she's still renting that studio apartment while her friends are buying condos." I folded my hands in my lap. "And did you tell her you took my savings?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "She doesn't know, does she?" I pressed gently. "She thinks this is your money you're investing. It doesn't matter whose money it is." Marcus stood suddenly, pacing the small space between the couch and the television. "What matters is the opportunity. You've always been like this, Mama. Always so scared of taking risks, always so content to just Just survive instead of actually living. You wonder why you've been stuck in this apartment for 30 years? It's because you never believed in anything bigger than what you could see right in front of you. The words landed like slaps, each one stinging more than the last. He was blaming me now, blaming me for my poverty, for my caution, for the very sacrifices I'd made to raise him. I watched him pace, his new shoes clicking against my old floor, and I felt something inside me harden like cooling steel. "You're right," I said softly. He stopped, turned to look at me with surprise. "What?" "You're right. I've always been scared. Scared of losing the electricity again. Scared of getting evicted. Scared of not being able to feed my son or put clothes on his back or keep a roof over his head. You're absolutely right, baby. I've spent my whole life being terrified of risks." Marcus's face softened slightly, thinking maybe he'd gotten through to me. "Mama, I didn't mean. But you know what I was never scared of?" I continued, my voice still that same quiet calm. "I was never scared of hard work. Never scared of sacrifice. Never scared of going without so you could have. And I was never, ever scared of being honest about where I got my money." He flinched like I'd struck him. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, standing slowly, my knees protesting after too many years of standing on diner floors. "You're going to take your flowers and your new shoes and your Tommy's cousin's friend investment opportunity, and you're going to walk out that door. And I'm going to let you. Mama, I'm going to let you walk into whatever's waiting for you out there. I'm not going to beg for my money back. I'm not going to call the police or guilt you or try to make you see what you've done. Because some lessons, Marcus, some lessons can only be learned by living them." His face crumbled then, just for a moment, and I saw the little boy beneath the man, the child who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to believe his mama could fix anything. "You don't believe in me?" he whispered, and there were tears in his voice. "You never have." "I believe in you so much," I said, and my own voice cracked just a little, "that I'm willing to let you fail, because that's what real love does, baby. It doesn't protect you from every hard truth. It trusts you enough to let you face them." He left then without another word. Didn't take the flowers with him, just left them on my coffee table like an abandoned promise. I watched from my window as he got into his car. Not the old Honda he'd been driving last month, but something newer, shinier, something that screamed I'm making it to anyone watching. I wondered how much of my money had paid for that car. The weeks that followed were strange. Marcus didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send so much as a text message. It was like I'd been erased from his life, deleted like an app he no longer needed. I went back to work at Rosie's, my feet aching in the same old way, my hands cramping around the same coffee pot I'd been lifting for decades. But something felt different now. Lighter, almost. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten it was there until I finally set it down. The other waitresses noticed. "You seem different, Alice," Rosie said one afternoon during the lull between lunch and dinner. "Peaceful, almost. You win the lottery or something?" I smiled and wiped down the counter. "Something like that." But 3 months later, the peace started to crack. It started with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered while folding laundry in my living room, the TV playing some game show in the background. "Is this Alice Morrison?" Marcus Morrison's mother. The voice was male, professional, cold. The kind of cold that meant business and nothing else. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who's asking?" "My name is David Chun. I'm calling from Riverside County Collections. Your son listed you as a reference on a loan application, and we're trying to reach him regarding several outstanding debts. Do you know where we can find him?" My stomach dropped. "What kind of debts?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, ma'am, but I can tell you that he's currently in default on multiple accounts totaling approximately $43,000. If you speak with him, please have him contact our office immediately." The call ended, but my hands kept shaking. $43,000. The house flipping scheme had failed. Of course it had failed. Schemes like that always did, eating up naive people's money like hungry wolves. But it wasn't just my money he'd lost. He'd borrowed more. Borrowed from people who didn't forgive, didn't forget, didn't care about his dreams or his excuses. The calls started coming every day after that. Different collection agencies, different amounts, same desperate question. Where is Marcus Morrison? I didn't know. And even if I did, I wasn't sure I would have told them. Then one night, about a week after the first collection call, someone knocked on my door at nearly midnight. Sharp, urgent knocks that made my heart race. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there. My son, but not my son. This Marcus was thinner, hollow-eyed. His clothes wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in them. Those expensive shoes were scuffed and dirty now, their shine long gone. "Mama," he said when I opened the door, his voice breaking on the word. "Mama, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go." He looked like a ghost of himself, haunted by choices that had finally come due. And despite everything, despite the theft, the betrayal, the cruel words he'd thrown at me, my heart still broke for him, because that's what mothers do. We break for our children even when they're the ones who broke us first. I stood there in my doorway, looking at the wreckage of my boy, and I knew this moment would define us both. I could close the door. I could let him face the consequences alone, the way he'd left me to face my poverty alone. I could let life finish the lesson it had started. Or I could do what I'd always done. Open my arms and my door and my heart, even when it cost me everything. The choice should have been easy. But as I looked into his desperate, hollow eyes, I realized that mercy and justice were about to go to war in my soul. And only one of them could win. I stepped aside and let him in, but I didn't speak. Not yet. Marcus stumbled through the doorway like a man who'd been wandering in the wilderness for days, and maybe he had been, just a different kind of wilderness than most people know. The wilderness of bad decisions and broken promises, where every path leads deeper into darkness and there's no map to guide you home. He collapsed onto my couch, that same worn couch where he'd sat just 3 months earlier with his new shoes and his rehearsed smile and his absolute certainty that he was going to change the world. Now he sat there trembling, his head in his hands, and the only thing he'd changed was himself. He'd turned into exactly what I'd feared he would become, his father's son. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Not because I wanted tea, but because my hands needed something to do besides reach for him, besides smooth his hair the way I used to when he was little and the world had hurt him. Some comfort has to be earned, I reminded myself. Some mercy has to come with truth attached, or it isn't mercy at all. It's just enabling dressed up in love's clothing. When I returned to the living room with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, Marcus hadn't moved. He sat hunched over like a man carrying the weight of the world on shoulders that had never been built for heavy loads. I handed him the mug, the same chipped one from childhood, and he took it with shaking hands. "Tell me everything," I said, settling into my chair. "And don't you dare lie to me, Marcus. Not anymore." He nodded, tears already streaming down his face. "It's gone, Mama. All of it. Your money, my savings, everything. Tommy's cousin. He wasn't who he said he was. The whole thing was a scam. Those houses he claimed to flip, they didn't exist. By the time we figured it out, he was gone. Phone disconnected. Office empty. Just gone." I sipped my tea and waited. There was more. There was always more. "I thought I could fix it," he continued, his voice cracking. "I thought if I just borrowed a little money, invested it somewhere else, I could make it all back before you even noticed. So I took out credit cards, personal loans. I even borrowed from this guy Simone's brother knew. Some loan shark who charges 30% interest. "How much?" I asked quietly. 43,000. The number came out like a confession, like a sin he'd been carrying in his mouth for too long. "And they want it back, Mama. All of it. They're threatening to sue me, to garnish my wages, to hurt me if I don't pay." My heart clenched, but I kept my face still. Where's Simone? His laugh was bitter, broken, gone. She left the day she found out. Said she couldn't be with someone so stupid, so reckless. Said I was just like my deadbeat father, and she wasn't about to waste her life on another Morrison man. He looked up at me then, his eyes red and desperate. She was right, wasn't she? I am just like him. I'm exactly what you tried to keep me from becoming, and I became it anyway. The words hung in the air between us like smoke, thick and suffocating. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell him he was better than his father, that one mistake didn't define him. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, that had watched 23 years of sacrifice disappear into his greedy hands, that part wanted him to sit with the truth of what he'd said, to really feel it. You're right, I said finally. You made the same choices your father made. You put your own dreams above everyone else's needs. You took what wasn't yours to take. You lied to the people who loved you. And now you're sitting in my living room at midnight, broke and broken, expecting me to fix it. He flinched with each sentence like I was striking him. I'm not expecting you to fix it, Mama. I know I don't deserve. Then why are you here, Marcus? The question stopped him cold. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know. I needed to see you, to tell you you were right, to say I'm sorry, even though sorry doesn't mean anything now. I set my mug down on the side table and leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my eyes locked on his. Sorry is a start, but sorry without change is just manipulation. Sorry without accountability is just noise. So let me ask you again. Why are you really here? He broke then. Completely, devastatingly broke. His shoulders shook with sobs he'd probably been holding in for weeks, and he cried the way children cry, loud and messy and without shame. I watched him fall apart, and something in me ached to go to him. But I stayed in my chair. This was his storm to weather, his darkness to sit in. I carried him for 25 years. It was time he learned to carry himself. I'm scared, Mama. He finally gasped out between sobs. I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I can't think about anything except the debt and the phone calls and the way I destroyed everything. I lost your money. I lost my girlfriend. I'm about to lose my apartment, maybe even my job. And I keep thinking about what you said, about letting life teach me. And it's teaching me, Mama. God. It's teaching me so hard I can barely breathe. I let the silence settle before I spoke. What is it teaching you, baby? He looked up at me with eyes that had aged years in just 3 months. That you can't shortcut your way to success. That greed isn't ambition. It's just fear dressed up in confidence. That the people who love you aren't holding you back. They're trying to keep you from walking off a cliff. He wiped his face with his sleeve. And that I had everything I needed, and I threw it away chasing everything I wanted. There it was. The lesson. The wisdom bought with pain and paid for in full. I stood slowly, my knees protesting, and walked over to him. I sat beside him on the couch, close but not touching, and I spoke in the voice I'd used when he was small and the world felt too big and scary. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to leave here tonight and face what you've done. You're going to contact every person you owe money to and set up payment plans, even if it takes you years to pay them back. You're going to keep your job and work as many hours as they'll give you. You're going to sell that fancy car and buy something you can actually afford. You're going to live small and humble and honest until you've cleaned up this mess. He nodded, tears still streaming. Okay, I will. I promise. I'm not finished. My voice was gentle but firm. You're also going to pay me back. Not all at once, I know you can't, but $50 a month. Every month. For the rest of however long it takes. Not because I need the money, Marcus. Because you need to remember what it cost me. You need to remember that real wealth isn't in a bank account. It's in the people who sacrifice for you, and the integrity you show when nobody's watching. I'll do it, Mama. I swear on everything. And one more thing. I turned to look at him fully. You're going to forgive yourself eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Because carrying shame forever doesn't make you noble. It just makes you useless. The world doesn't need another broken man too guilty to do good. It needs men who've learned from their mistakes and turned their scars into wisdom. Marcus stayed for another hour, drinking tea and talking through the mess he'd made. We worked out a plan together, a realistic one this time without shortcuts or schemes. When he finally stood to leave, he looked lighter somehow, like confession had lifted some of the weight off his shoulders. At the door, he turned back to me. Mama, why didn't you slam the door in my face? After everything I did, why did you let me in? I smiled. A small, sad smile that held 25 years of motherhood in it. Because I remembered something while I was waiting for you to come back. I remembered that when you were 7 years old, you stole $5 from my purse to buy candy at the corner store. You felt so guilty you couldn't even enjoy it. You came home crying, confessed what you'd done, and spent the next month doing extra chores to pay me back. You learned the lesson then, baby. You just forgot it for a while. He hugged me then. Really hugged me. Not the perfunctory embrace from before, but a desperate, grateful, broken man hug that said everything his words couldn't. And I hugged him back, because that's what mothers do. We don't stop loving when our children fail. We love them through the failure until they remember who they really are. I won't forget again, he whispered. I promise. I know you won't, baby. Life's already made sure of that. I watched him drive away in that expensive car for what would be the last time. He'd sell it within the week for a used Honda with 150,000 miles on it. And as his taillights disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because I'd gotten my money back. I probably never would, not all of it. And not because justice had been served in some perfect, poetic way, but because I'd done what I set out to do. I'd let life teach him the lesson I couldn't. And he'd learned it. 6 months later, Marcus showed up at my door with his first $50 payment in cash and a grocery bag full of supplies to fix my leaky roof. He'd been working overtime every week, living in a tiny studio apartment, eating rice and beans and slowly, so slowly, paying back his debts. The loan shark got paid first, then the credit cards, and then, faithfully, me. It took him 4 years to pay me back completely. 4 years of $50 bills handed over on the first of every month. Sometimes with apologies, always with gratitude. By the time the debt was cleared, my coffee tin was full again. Not just with money, but with something more valuable. Proof that my son had found his way back to integrity. People ask me sometimes if I regret letting life teach him instead of protecting him from the consequences. They ask if I should have been harder on him, cut him off completely, let him drown in the mess he'd made. But I know something they don't. Mercy and justice aren't opposites. Sometimes the most merciful thing you can do is let someone face the full weight of their choices. And sometimes the most just thing you can do is leave the door open for their return. My son stole my savings without asking, and I let life teach him the price of greed. But what he learned was worth more than any amount I could have saved. That love doesn't mean rescue. It means having faith that the person you raised is still in there, buried beneath the mistakes, waiting to remember who they really are. And sometimes, that faith is the only inheritance that matters. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even our deepest wounds can teach us wisdom, then do me a favor. Subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories so you never miss a tale. Life has given me many lessons, and I'm here to share every one of them with you. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll know when the next story drops. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to let someone you love face the consequences of their choices? What did they learn? What did you learn? New videos drop every single day with more stories of life, love, betrayal, and the wisdom that comes from surviving it all. Remember, my dear, life's greatest teacher isn't found in books or classrooms. It's found in the choices we make and the prices we pay. Until tomorrow, this is Grandma Alice, reminding you that love sometimes means letting go, and wisdom sometimes comes wrapped in pain. But both are worth it in the end. Stay blessed, stay wise, and I'll see you in the next story.